Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? I don't hear a resounding yes. Can everybody hear me well? Okay, good. Let me just look over to the folks with the stream and make sure that we're live and that everything's working fine. Pardon me just a moment. Okay, so hi everybody, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Patrick Vanderwill. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at InterDigital. Welcome to our 2018 Investor Day. Thank you all for coming to the NYU Wireless Lab here in Brooklyn for this event. We chose the NYU Wireless Lab for a very specific reason. These are folks that we work very closely with, and probably one of the top wireless labs in the United States, and we're really pleased to have them as a partner and very thankful that they're allowing us to use this space to do our event. The agenda today is relatively straightforward. We've got some technology demos over here on the left. I'll caution you about thinking that that is all that we do. We've got a lot of stuff that we've got going on, but these are a couple of our more interesting demos in the field of edge computing. So to kick off the day, I'm going to ask Bob DeFazio, who's a Vice President and the head of InterDigital Labs, to come up here, say a few words about the demo. While Bob is making his way up, I'll have you note that once this event is over, the folks at NYU would be very pleased to give you a tour of the labs here, and I would encourage you to take them up on it. It's a very, very interesting lab, and a lot of technology that is going to represent investment opportunities in the future is going to come out of this lab here. So I'll turn it over to Bob.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. So, Patrick, you didn't do the forward-looking statements, so you shouldn't leave that to an engineer. So I can skip this slide. Okay, so we're going to start off with just a couple of minutes talking about some technology and some demonstrations. So, as Patrick said, I'm Bob DeFazio, and I run InterDigital Labs, which is our worldwide research and development organization. Together with us and the Technicolor research team that we collaborate with, we're upwards of around 250 engineers and scientists, and we drive the technology that's the foundation of InterDigital's business, and we concentrate on the 4 business areas that you'll hear a lot about today: 5G, video, IoT, and consumer electronics. So what we do is we look for projects that are ahead of the technology curve, that turn into useful technology, and we're very, very productive participants in international standards where we bring this technology and we collaborate with all the big players across the world. We belong to numerous industry groups. We participate in a lot of test beds where we demonstrate and evangelize our technology. And on the right of the slide, there's just a collection of some of the projects we're working on, which are all supporting the technology areas. And, you know, I mean, in fact, almost all of those technology areas are, in a way, a subset of a broad definition of 5G. So, I mean, we can talk about this all day, but since we only have a few minutes here, we decided that today we would focus on one particular aspect of 5G technology, which is edge computing. And it's an interesting topic because what it reminds us of is that 5G is a lot more than just a very, very powerful connectivity technology, in that it's also a network technology. And to make this all work, you need to bring some forward-looking technology into the network. So when we think about 5G, we talk about ultra-broadband connectivity, extremely low latency. And when you think about what it takes to do this, if you want broadband everywhere, if you want low latency, you simply need to be close to the users with the equipment. You know, whether you're talking about video delivery or anything that's real time. When you hear that word real time, you have to think about low latency, and you have to think about getting the hardware and the software close to the users. Now, if you think about that a little more, you think, well, if I'm going to be close to the users, I'm building out a lot of infrastructure. So the corollary to this is that it's got to be a software-defined implementation that runs on low-cost IT-like hardware. And that's a very, very fundamental concept in 5G technology. And there's a bunch of use cases listed at the bottom of the slide. So obviously video delivery, and the video content delivery networks have known this for years and years. If you look at any of them, they have servers all over the world as close to the users as possible. But the idea for 5G is to bring this capability to any use case. So if you hear real-time control, real-time analytics, subsets of that, effectively autonomous driving, assisted driving, industrial IoT. If you like gaming, you want to do interactive gaming, and people are more and more finding out that the wireless cellular network can give better quality of service than Wi-Fi when you're out in the world. So all of these things demand close to the user edge computing. So I'm going to stop there, and we have two demos. One of them will talk about the connectivity that we can provide in a cost-effective way to get the broadband low latency close to the users. And the other demo will talk about an edge computing platform that's an example of both a development platform and a particularly interesting use case. So with that, let me introduce Jane Mack. And Jane, your demo.
Good morning, everybody.
There's a portable mic if you'd like.
I need that.
Okay.
No, I think you do for this stream. You do the mic.
All right, can everybody hear me? I think I have to stand here. All right. InterDigital has always been at the forefront of emerging technology. We purposely try to stay ahead of the curve by starting our research in technology as early as possible. An example of this is our work with millimeter wave technology, which we began in 2011. And all right, and has since evolved into what we know today as 5G technology. Because of this early start, we have our EdgeLink solution, which is a major accomplishment in 5G millimeter wave technology. Because of this early start, we have this EdgeLink solution. And what we have today is a demonstration of our EdgeLink solution where we basically enhance our millimeter wave technology by adding a mesh topology to it to create an SCN-based multi-hop mesh network. Our mesh controller software is a ONOSpace software, which is the leading open source SCN controller that's used by service providers. Our technology can be used to support fixed wireless broadband services with its low latency gigabit links and on the millimeter wave lengths. And it's also ideal for supporting applications, even applications that haven't been developed yet. These could be applications that are AR, VR related, self-driving cars, remote surgery, IoT sensors, and any cloud connected devices. All right. Our EdgeLink is a field-tested, cost-effective system that has been designed to be rapidly deployed. This makes our platform ideal for universities to use as for research. You know, as part of the POWER project, which is a National Science Foundation, which is supported by the National Science Foundation, EdgeLink will be deployed by NYU and Rutgers in an outdoor test bed, all right, that will be used to further research in 5G technology. Okay. All right. All right, our EdgeLink demonstration today consists of a 3-node mesh configuration. We basically have installed 3 multi-sector nodes on the rooftop of one of our office locations. That location is in Melville, Long Island. All right, we also have a camera installed on the roof, and the video from the camera is going over one of the millimeter wave links. All right. Before we start getting to the demo a little bit more, I want to explain to you some of the benefits of having a mesh controller that you will see in this demo. Because we have a mesh controller, we have the ability to mitigate interference and blockages that can occur in a real-world scenario. These blockages are likely to be temporary, so the mesh controller will always try to recover the link by, through a sector or node recovery procedure. All right, so what you see here is our demonstration of EdgeLink, and we have basically here an application that is, that I'm actually remotely logged into an application of our EdgeLink system. And this application is showing you the links that are running right now. So we have 3 links right now, and 2 of these links are what we call primary links that can be used for front haul and back haul traffic, and the 3rd link can be used as a backup link. Now, because what we also have in this demonstration is that we are periodically inserting an artificial link failure to simulate a blockage, right? And we also are periodically removing the link failure to show that the mesh controller can recover from this temporary type condition. So right now what I have here is you have some traffic running on the link between node 1 and node 3. You know, this thing is running periodically, so it's not in the state that it should be as I speak. But, you know, normally the traffic would be going between, here we are. So the camera video is going between the link between node 1 and 3, and we also have some additional traffic going on the same link but in the opposite direction. All right, so when the artificial link failure is injected into the system, the mesh controller will automatically detect the link failure and actually move the data from the primary path to the backup path, which is what you see here. The link has gone down, and now the traffic for the camera and the other traffic is going through this backup link. So once the link failure is removed, the mesh controller will be able to detect that, recover the link, and go back and send the data back to the original path.
Jane, I'll just stop you there. I think what would be most productive would be at the end of the investor presentation, if folks would like to see the demos.
Yeah, I think that makes
people
sense.
Can go on up to the demos and take a look. I think because we can't see.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, not a problem.
No,
Bob, do you want to go through the next demo?
Yes.
Sure.
All right. Here you go.
Okay, so this is a demonstration of 5G Edge with a mission-critical automation application. So this is actually a combination of two technology areas working here at InterDigital. One is edge computing, and we have a platform we call AdvanTedge. It's a mobile edge emulation platform. So this is an experimentation sandbox development environment. So for an edge application developer, or maybe a researcher, a network architect, where they can experiment and deploy example edge systems in a fast, agile manner. So it runs in a Linux environment, and it emulates an edge network on basically on a Linux machine, or also in a small cluster. This would allow, for example, an application developer to determine what parts of their application they may want to deploy across the edge infrastructure. So the edge is not a homogeneous environment. There'll be different layers of edge depending on where edge resources are placed in the network, either closer to the user at the points of access, or some may be further away in core network sites. Each one of those will have different properties, and this environment allows an application developer to experiment with those. And at times, those have been our own, some of our own developers. Another area we've been looking into is drone traffic management. Okay, so this is autonomous drones. There's an effort underway here in the U.S. that is that's being driven by NASA. Similar efforts are going on in Europe, but it's about allowing or enabling beyond line of sight non-operator autonomous drones. So today, you can only deploy drones that are line of sight with a pilot operating those drones directly. So this technology is about enabling autonomous drones beyond line of sight that don't need direct pilots. So what we've done is we've taken our UTM traffic management platform and we've deployed it on our edge, our Advantage mobile edge emulation system. And the UTM system has two components. There's a back-end component that runs in the cloud that's doing strategic airspace management planning. So this is before a drone is flying, getting approval for its flight path, those types of operations. And then we have an edge component, we call it a detect and avoid service, that's running at the edge. So it's running at the edge of the network, it's taking in telemetry information from the drones, maybe other hazard information that's coming from ground sensors, it's combining that and it can issue resolution advisories back out to the drones if it's seen collision, I'll say opportunities, collision opportunities to mitigate those. So we're using a drone emulator, so we're not flying drones live right now. We're using a drone emulator. It's called the Universal Ground Control System. This is a commercial drone flight station tool that comes with an emulator. And we're flying a set of drones around downtown Montreal. So our development team that's working on this is in our Montreal office. We have a set of 6 drones operating in the space. The little green drone, which I know you can't see, is we're following its path. And you'll notice when the drones get near each other, they'll appear as orange. It may be best to take a look at this afterwards. But they'll appear as orange when one of these resolution advisories is being issued to them. And this is one of, in the 5G, right? 5G quadrant. This is in the ultra reliable, low latency communication quadrant of 5G use cases.
Yeah, that's an important last point. So one of the themes today is with the world of 5G, what we're seeing is that the traditional paradigm that our company has operated on, which has been develop technologies that are going to connect primarily handsets and license those handsets, we're beginning to see that world expand into a variety of different areas. So I think that's going to be the theme for our conversation today. With that, I'm going to ask Bill to come on up and talk about some of the transformations that we've seen at InterDigital.
Well, good morning to everyone. Thank you again for coming out to Brooklyn today. It's, as I said, we've had a long-standing relationship with the folks at NYU Wireless. They do some fantastic work for us. I will remind people that we will be having forward-looking statements during the course of this presentation, so I'll refer you to our investor filings with respect to those. So I'm going to cover what I really think has been a transformation of the company. And then Kai will come in and talk about how we take the new assets of the company and basically drive deals and drive values. And that's to drive value not only for our customers, but for our shareholders as well. And then Rich will chat about how that all comes together in the financial statements. So with regard to the transformation of the company, I think this one slide kind of captures it, hopefully in a nutshell. So I think you all are aware, and you've seen a little bit more today, of the sort of the prowess of the company around wireless technologies. We've been involved for a very long time, and we're considered one of the leaders. So if you think about what Dolby is to sound, InterDigital is to wireless. So you have that 4 decades of pioneering work by the company, now combined with the incredible expertise of Technicolor. So just as a little background, we acquired, essentially the entire portfolio of assets from Technicolor. And what does that portfolio represent? It represents 20 years of innovation from Technicolor. So that's what the company acquired, this amazing jump start for the company in terms of its wireless, its video capability. And then we have this ongoing relationship with Technicolor as well to continue to refresh that portfolio. So we now have an incredibly deep anchor position with respect to both of these technologies. And there's a unique characteristic to these technologies. It's similar to both. And that is the standards base for that, meaning these are technologies that have been developed through standards bodies, or in conjunction with standards bodies, which, when they are adopted, gives us access to 100% of the market. So it's a very efficient way to get your engineering innovations into the market. So that has happened for a long time for us on wireless. It happened for a long time for Technicolor on the video side. They now come together at the company and give us this very significant position across a whole range of products, which we'll talk about in a minute. These two technologies then come together to drive a very powerful customer experience. And we'll talk a little later about that, but if you think about cellular devices, handsets, tablets, things in the home, set-top boxes, the technology that is driving those devices, in addition to some other technology, but the foundational technology of those devices is wireless and video. And the company now has a fundamental position with respect to both. And then last, all of that innovation, both in wireless and in video, that success and standardization of the technologies, that more powerful experience is now protected through what is one of the largest patent portfolios in the world focused on video and wireless technology. So it is a very, very significant change in terms of the breadth of the company, the depth of the company, and the opportunities that the company has going forward. So let's drill down into each of these a little bit. So we'll start with the patent portfolio. So the small circles here represent the sort of pre-existing portfolio. So that was InterDigital before, this was Technicolor before. Very interesting combination of the two portfolios. If you look at our portfolio, predominantly wireless. Other aspects of technology, we had video in there, we had Wi-Fi in there, we had some device hardware, but it was predominantly wireless. If you look at the Technicolor portfolio, only a small piece of it was wireless. It is predominantly video, apps and services, and device software. When the two portfolios come together, representing over 36,000 patents, they form a very broad set of technologies. It has now cellular, video, apps and services, device hardware, networking, and Wi-Fi, all in roughly equal proportion. I mean, it's actually an amazing combination of these two portfolios to come together to form this very balanced set of assets which relate to some very, very important markets. So I can't think of a better portfolio that would have been, or a portfolio that would have been more synergistic with the company than the Technicolor portfolio. That portfolio, on a go-forward basis, is going to be supported by the continuing research efforts by InterDigital and by Technicolor, with whom we have a contractual relationship. So just some metrics around the contributions by the company. I mean, we had a tremendous number of contributions over the last number of years as 5G was and continues to be in sort of full tilt mode from a development standpoint. So 1,000 contributions to 3GPP, which is the standards body which drives 5G. The number of technical papers produced by the company, very significant. Overall, the investment in research by the company, very significant. That is now coupled with an also very significant effort coming out of Technicolor. Them making very significant number of contributions to the video standards bodies, them publishing the number of papers, them investing a tremendous amount of money in research. So those two research capabilities are now combined going forward to replenish that portfolio that we've put together between the two companies. So you have a much stronger patent portfolio, a much stronger research capability. You have a much broader footprint for the company. So one of the things about engineering resources is that you sometimes go to where they are. So the company has greatly broadened its footprint from a development standpoint, having development efforts now not only here in New York, down in Pennsylvania, up in Canada, in San Diego on the West Coast. We've got a facility in the UK. We've got effectively a facility now in Rennes, France, and smaller facilities in Berlin and Shanghai. So it's as well as Maryland. It's a very, very strong global footprint that gives us access to a tremendous amount of engineering resources, which will drive that portfolio and that innovation on a go-forward basis. So a very, very strong technology footprint that now will drive into 3 interconnected markets. And I think that's a very important part of our value, is that we're able to take largely the same technologies and drive them into each of these three markets. Each will have somewhat of a unique character to them, but we couldn't draw these bubbles closer because you lose the words, but actually the center of those three bubbles, the overlapping piece of those three bubbles is a very important piece because that's where cellular sits, that's where video sits, and those technologies drive into all three of those markets. So you get tremendous reuse. So you think about the value of the company being its revenue less its cost. The fact that we can reuse technology across all three markets gives us a highly profitable licensing engine, right? So you have the connected devices. That's been the historic licensing platform for the company. That's handsets and tablets and things like that. But that will also be connected devices, meaning like IoT connections. And I'd say that sits at that intersection between Internet of Things and connected devices, right? You have the Internet of Things, which the company has been working on for a number of years. You'll hear an update on that today. And that's those connections and the software that manages them. So again, the connections sit at the intersection. The software sits a little bit on the outside. But then there's an overlap between the IoT devices in that red block and the consumer electronics in the purple block. So consumer electronics are things like TVs, set-top boxes, other streaming devices, but could also be those devices in the home that set up, in effect, an IoT or a smart home environment. So all of these three markets intersect with one another. All of them are able to reuse the technology at the company, again, giving us a very efficient way to get to what is a massive market. If you think about the available markets out there, it's hard to think of three that are bigger than these three. Right. So let's go through each one of them a little bit, how we see the markets and how we see our opportunity. So connected devices, handsets and tablets have been a very strong market for the company for a very long time. No surprise, everyone sees it. Handset market and tablet market sort of flattening. But it's flattening at a spectacular number, about 2 billion units, right? So we have great opportunity with respect to not only our existing technology, LTE, to license into that space, as we're doing today, but 5G will be another licensing opportunity within that space. It will continue to be a massive market, even if the growth rate has slowed. But what's going to happen with respect to cellular connected devices? Well, one of the things we know, and this has been true of the prior Gs, and I think is even be more true of 5G, is that the new generation of technology drives all sorts of new product classes, right? And that's going to be the same thing with respect to 5G. We've chatted about 5G in terms of it's not like the other Gs, which really had a single use case, and whether that was, digital voice, mobile data, big data. 5G is driving a whole set of use cases out there. So one, there will be an increase in the number of 5G-enabled devices because there's going to be not only the handsets and tablets, which will be 5G, there'll be a whole host of small cells that are 5G and a whole range of other products that will be enabled with 5G technology. So that's the first, I think, about growth vector on top of handsets and tablets. This is all, if you read about 5G, it all comes out in various industry reports in terms of all the things that 5G is going to be. And as we've chatted about as a company a number of times, while each G, you could, the first G, 2G was probably somewhat, or probably revolutionary because it created an entire industry as we know it today. 3G and 4G, I'd say, were more evolutionary in terms of what they brought to bear. 5G is much more of a revolution in terms of what it's going to do. And again, that creates great opportunity for us. We're in the middle of 5G development. Our team is doing a great job in driving that capability. And it's a great opportunity for us to ride that 5G wave wherever it may go. In terms of, let's see if I can go ahead to one slide here. How you think about the handset market in any event, right? So what you had for a number of years was independent devices. You see, a number of us have been around for a while. You had these independent devices that didn't talk to one another, or if they did talk to one another, it was a tough conversation because you had to either plug it into your computer or do something, right, to get them to work together. they all came together in your smartphone. So your smartphone was gobbling up form factors day and night to create this incredibly powerful tool that we all carry around with us today. And that's really the trend you saw over the last number of years, right? And it was a great trend because it drove smartphone growth through the roof. What you're going to see going forward, we believe, is now we call it a decade of divergence. This is a IBB consulting report. We agree with this, where in some ways those standalone devices start to come back, but they're now synchronized. So think about, as an example, your watch. So watches got cannibalized by smartphones. I mean, I grew up in a generation where everybody wore a watch. And once the smartphones were the rage, nobody wore a watch because everybody just got the time off their phone. But then the watch now reappears on the scene because it's synchronized with your cell phone. But importantly, once the watch was cellular enabled, it had an independent life. It could do its own things. You could go out for a day with just your watch. And there's going to be a range of other devices that emerge that are now synchronized, but they're independent, and that will drive volumes within the 5G space as well. So from the core licensing opportunity of the company, we're very bullish about where that can go because, one, the level at which it is plateauing in terms of handsets and tablets, a very, very high level. And the opportunity for 5G to drive other form factors very, very high, and we're seeing evidence of that already. So in terms of the next market, so consumer electronics. So this is the new opportunity that really is enabled by the Technicolor acquisition. And you think about it in a couple different places. It's vision, so things like digital displays in your home, other types of things that enable sort of a visual experience in your home. Audio, so things like your Alexa and other types of things that are wireless-based but have a sort of a interaction with you on voice and hearing and things like that. And then IoT, think about in the home as sort of smart home and other devices. These are all opportunities that what I'd say is the company had a position before. It was a somewhat modest position with respect to each of these spaces, but with the Technicolor acquisition, now has a very foundational opportunity to license in this space. And this is a big, big space. Now, one thing people talk about consumer electronics, they say, well, it's been around for a long time. Isn't it a little bit mature and a little bit sleepy? Yes, it's mature, meaning it's been around for a while. It's anything but sleepy. This is an area where innovation continues to happen very rapidly, particularly when you think about 5G penetrating the home, the smart home emerging, all the immersive experience, AI, machine learning, all the things that are coming at home. So there's a huge amount of innovation going on within the home. A great opportunity for a company like InterDigital that has this great resource engine that it can bring to bear on this market. So if you think about, vision products in the home, almost 1 billion units. Audio products, only 500 million units. And IoT and other products, 750 million units. So this is a very, very large market in which the company now has an opportunity to participate. So it's one thing for it to be a really big market. The second is, do you have license to play in that market? And I would say it's a resounding yes for the company. Why is that? Because if you look at the various technologies that enable those consumer electronic products in the home, what are the things that enable? Wi-Fi enables it. Cellular will enable it. Video enables it. No, we don't have every one of the technology, but three of the, I think, the foundational technologies that will drive that home experience, we now not only have a very large patent portfolio with regard to, but also have very critical R&D resources behind them to drive them. So a very, very large market where we have a very significant opportunity to play. If you look at the devices within that market that are growing versus those that are shrinking, the ones that are growing have a tremendous amount of wireless and video innovation happening behind them. So we're at the, I would say, the sort of the growing part of the market as opposed to the shrinking side of the market. And the last thing about these markets, and this comes from experience of working within the licensing world, because the company's opportunity will continue to be licensing, is it a market that is open to licensing? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. If you think about the variety of licensing activities that already go on within consumer electronics, whether it's pool-based licensing, whether there are other companies like Dolby and a number of others that license in this space. This is a market that understands licensing, and that's very important for us in terms of our ability to address a market. So when you look at this whole market, you have obviously mobile, in which we have an established program. We have the TV programs, in which we've launched or taken over the Madison program, which was a combination of Technicolor, Sony, and us now. And then you have all these other in-home, call it video-centric devices, in which we also have an opportunity as well. Some of these areas are more mature than others, so set-top box licensing, much more mature than some other things, but a great opportunity for us to ultimately address this entire pie. Right? So a fantastic opportunity, really enabled by the Technicolor acquisition, and why I say the company is much different today than it was a year ago. So talk a little bit about IoT. So you had the three markets for licensing. We had connected devices. We talked about that. We've got the consumer electronics. Talk about that. Again, these things all intersect. So the last one is IoT. So I think most of the folks in this room have been observing the IoT market. I'd say, it continues to be a little slow to develop. Part of that is if you ever looked at a ecosystem map of IoT, it's complete chaos at the moment. Not surprising if you go back and look at other industries. Look at the mobile industry way back when you had multiple standards, lots and lots of companies participating, lack of interoperability. You had the same type of situation. So we've seen it before. So from the company's perspective, we have two opportunities within IoT. One is as I talked about, at the connection level. And that's what this one speaks to, and then we'll talk a little bit about called the middleware or connection management level. So, while we have a position with respect to both cellular and Wi-Fi connections, typically the company's position over the years has been stronger with respect to cellular. If you look at the reports, there's always some variation among the reports. Cellular is not the top type of connection out there, but it is growing in importance. Part of that is driven by the development of the standards community of lower cost, lower power connection devices, but also the importance that some of these connections will have in terms of the need for reliability, durability, and other things. So overall, we see a very nice position for cellular going forward, whether that's in automobiles, and within smart buildings, retail environment, industrial environments, and the like. So we're very encouraged by what we're seeing on the cellular IoT side. Rich will talk a little bit later about the our thoughts from a financial perspective on this market. So all good. Yes, slower to develop, but we still think pointing in the right direction. When we think about the other aspect of IoT, so you will have this management layer within IoT. It's you need something to onboard these devices, to authenticate them, to secure them. There's a variety of platforms in the market today. Less today than there have been before, as the world sort of figures out what connectivity platform or what connectivity management platform is going to exist. We don't think there's going to be just one. We suspect there will be a handful. Our opportunity is, while we have a position across some of the fundamental technologies which are regardless of which type of platform it is, our biggest position was within what's called the 1M to M standard. And that's a standard that began with ETSI, is now grown up within 3GPP. And I'd say it's an operator-oriented standard. It's not limited to operator deployments, but I'd say that's its best orientation. So the question is really, what level of deployment do we get for that standard? And the best opportunity for deployment, we think, is within the mobile operators. We've seen a significant increase in the interest in operators in looking to test and deploy systems over the last year. Why is that? Because if you look at this chart, operators do not want to be left out of the IoT opportunity. That small sliver at the top and then that next piece below it if you looked at historic operator revenue, just in terms of connections and connectivity, that's all they would have access to. They want access to the rest. And part of that is if you look at operator revenue growth without some big driver is actually pretty modest. They need a growth driver. The growth driver actually is in that bottom part of this chart, and that's in, can they put together a platform? Can they, either themselves or through partnership, offer value-added services and provide an end-to-end solution? There is an incredible opportunity for the operators to do that. And part of that opportunity is fueled by the 1M2M standard, because that gives the operator the platform to offer those services. So we're in conversations with a number of operators around this, and we think so far those have been very positive conversations. So far we've seen good interest by the operators in terms of wanting to deploy systems, and we'll see how it plays out. You know, I compare this to 2 years ago when we were looking at IoT. The interest and traction of 1M2M has increased very significantly over that period. We're not out of the woods yet, but I think we're in a really good spot and headed in the right direction. So we'll see how that develops over the next year. So those are the three markets for the company. So connected devices, consumer electronics, and IoT. And when you think about those in terms of how they play out in growth for the company, they actually stack on top of each other very well. So we're in the LTE licensing cycle that is now enhanced by video as well. So we're operating to the same goal that we had there before, with an opportunity to move that up a little bit based upon the video technologies. There is a very, very large licensing base for us within consumer electronics. That is a here and now opportunity. We don't need to do, while we're going to continue to do innovation, that licensing opportunity is here today for the company's taking, so we're going to be focused on that. IoT, as I said, certainly the assets that the company has developed are here today. There's a good traction on the cellular connection side. The software side, we're waiting to see how that develops, but very encouraging signs over the last year. So that becomes the third growth factor for the company. And then 5G really wraps around them all. If you think about 5G, what does it do? It drives that first one, continues to drive the whole handset licensing program for the company. What's 5G do? It drives into the home, so it drives the consumer electronics play. And what does 5G do? It drives into IoT and in terms of driving those connections. So while it's shown as a separate engine, it's really integrated into all of those and driving all three of those.
So just to understand that slide, can you just give us a sense of how the 4 bars tie to the 302 to 308?
That's this 2018. So,
right, but how does it,
so I'd say
how does it divide between those 4 arrows?
Right. So if you looked at the revenue from the company in 2018, but for a few $1 million in revenue, it's all off of that first bar.
Okay,
right. So, but from a technology standpoint, we have transformed the company. From a market standpoint, we have transformed the company. And from a management standpoint, we have transformed the company as well. There's Patrick is a big hockey fan, as well as a number of other Brits. There's Gretzky's line, which is, you skate to where the puck is going, right? Look at the management team that we put together over the last year. It's really a team that is able to address those, not only the markets we're in, but the markets now that we've acquired and going into. So, Kai comes from his experience at Nokia, so certainly has a great experience in terms of the markets we've been in, but also with his work at Cirrus and other opportunities, knows the markets we are going to. He also, we'll talk later, he brings a very important component to this company, which is knowledge of the person on the other side of the table. I think that's a critically important component for this company as we look to be even more successful in licensing. Understand what's important to that person you're negotiating with. And I can't think of anybody better because he did this for a long time on Nokia's side of the equation. Eric comes to us from Dolby, obviously brings us that capability from understanding the consumer electronics space. Dr. Thierry is here somewhere today. Brings us a broad variety, not only of technology capability from his time at Nokia, but also from his time at Harman. And then Jeff Belk, if you think about where the company's licensing activities are going to take place, a lot of it's going to be in China. A lot of it requires the company to rethink how it engages with customers, because it's a different set of customers. And Jeff went through a very, very interesting transition with Qualcomm when it went from IS-95 to WCDMA. I called it in one investor deck a wicked pivot that they had to go through back then, and I couldn't think of anybody else to help this company through that pivot as well. And then you've got a whole range of other folks. People are here today. Rich Bresky, I'm the CFO. Jeannie Lau is here today, our general counsel. Tim Burgeis, who took over for Larry in terms of running the licensing operations for the company, doing a great job of being out there with the customer. Nicole Kenny is somebody who has more global experience, which is necessary for us if you go back to see it, look at that footprint that the company has today. Jim Nolan here as well. Jim driving the product operation for the company, but also being very important in terms of our customer engagement on the licensing side. I met Bob DeFazio and Patrick Vanderwill, you know, as well. So you have a transformed technology footprint for the company, transformed market opportunity, a transformed management team. The thing that's the same about the company is how we think about technology. That has remained the same. And people ask sometimes, why is InterDigital, why would the world be different if InterDigital wasn't around? And I'd say the thing that we do, I think better than anybody else, and it's part of the reason is because we are not a slave to any product. We come at every problem from a systems perspective. We take a step back and think about the system and how it's all going to work together. And when we think about system, we've used this before. We think about, in terms of when you're delivering a service to somebody. Okay, what's the content you're going to deliver to them? What's the context in which you're delivering it to them? And what are the connectivity options for that? That's one way of thinking about the system aspects of what we've done. And so when we think about, and one of the things that gets me really excited about video and wireless is that, I don't know, we're not the first company to have very strong positions in both, although there's very few that have the depth in both that we do. I think the unique quality that we will bring to that is thinking about those two technologies together in a system, and how do they work together, and how do they interrelate. That will be, and has always been, the system perspective, the InterDigital difference. So while a lot of other things have changed, and a lot of companies very different, this is what I call the company's DNA. This has not changed. And this is what has carried the company for my tenure with the company, 22 years or something like that, and will continue to carry us forward. So with that, let me turn it over to Guy.
Thank you, Bill. So my name is Guy Östman. I joined the company 2 months ago, and for somebody as new as I am in the company, one question that you often get, so I'll take it off the table immediately, is, so what made you join the company? And the capability to innovate, I think, is actually one of the key reasons that I decided to join. I was 4 years in the board. I was able to see extensive kind of a due diligence time, look under the hood and what the company does. And really the capability to create new innovation, create the first in the world, and monetize that is kind of very unique in the world. But rather than take just my word for it, let's look at what actually other people say about it. So we took third-party analyst reports over the years on how do the external world look at InterDigital, and since 2012. And one way of looking at it is if you look at the strength of the patent holders in the overall cellular space, more than 70% of the time, actually, InterDigital was quoted as among the top 3. And we were actually tied for the highest percentage of any company. If we look at in 4G, the different reports different, kind of have slightly different opinions, but our standard essential patent portfolio ranges between 7 to 10% of the total. Average is more than 8% of the total. And different reports rank us between 2 in some reports, 5 in some reports. In 3G, the same way, the average is over 10% or close to 10%. And our 3G SCP portfolio was ranked to be either number 2 or number 3 in the industry. So certainly clearly a top tier player in wireless. If we then look at the assets, the patent portfolio that we hold, one of the strongest patent portfolios in the industry. Over 10,000 assets related to the 3GPP cellular technologies alone. In 3G, we cover all major deployed standards, including wideband CDMA, HSPA+. In 4G, we cover all currently deployed standards, including, of course, LTE Advanced and so on. New, very important standards that are currently being deployed by the carriers around the world: dynamic scheduling, MIMO, carrier aggregation, very important piece of efficiency for the operators. Unlicensed LTE, spectrum LTE, and vehicle-to-vehicle communications, just to name a few. In 5G, very active in 5G, in the release 15, which was the first release of 5G. We both for the new radio side and LTE, as well as the newer findings now in release 16, the latest release in 3GPP. Not only cellular, we also cover our patent portfolio, excuse me, covers also all major releases in Wi-Fi side. So how do we do it? And part of it is the example of the demo that we are doing today. So there's a number of industry first, which sometimes goes kind of unnoticed and is not necessarily written that much about. But if you think about our 5G innovation, what has led us to be such a strong contributor in 5G has been many of the world's first demos and systems, as Bill said, system level world firsts that we have then demoed during the last 4 years. So example of that would be in 2014. We did the world first Y gigabit based mesh backhaul and technology. And then if you look at kind of today, this year, would be the world's first demonstration of service-based 5G control plane. Again, a very core, essential part of the 5G kind of promise to the world. And all this actually comes then together in the standards work and in the standards contribution in 5G. Now, that's about cellular. Now, what about the video side? So the acquisition of the Technicolor patent business portfolio makes us instantly a major player in the video side. We have been doing ourselves video research over the years, and now if you combine the Technicolor portfolio with our own, we have about 8,000 assets, 1/3 of which covering standards-based technologies. It covers various video technologies, coding standards such as the H.264 to 265, all the main profiles, and is applicable, also covers and is applicable in various different digital TV standards such as ATSC or DVB or DTV, in video, real-time video streaming, in broadcast, and in high dynamic range. Now, Bill talked about a bit on how do we want to restructure and our approach towards our customers. I'll talk about that a bit here. So we have restructured this and rethought about how do we actually the key question is, how do we get closer to our customers? How do we understand them better? And how do we bring about kind of to bear all the great work that we do in different sides of the company? So this is not only about bringing the standardized technologies and the innovations through the standardized technologies, but we have a great R&D machine. So how do we kind of bring that closer to our customers? Both for the benefit of us understanding what our customers want, therefore we be able to create new innovations, kind of be more relevant, but also kind of an ability to do joint research, jointly funded research. It could be also a joint kind of a collaboration in the standards work, and so on. So the other vector that we are looking at and have committed to is, if you look at our kind of opportunity space, so unlicensed space in the wireless side, it's basically the kind of a big part of them are Chinese-based. So we've decided to actually get much closer to those customers, be present in the Chinese market. We have opened up already a office in Shanghai, where we have both BD and research, plan to have both BD and research capabilities present. We are planning to expand that presence also into Beijing. We are engaging the Chinese universities for funded research. We are also engaging increasingly sophisticated and growing IP community in China. And all this, we are doing all this to the end that by getting closer to our customers, we will be our kind of renewal, with our kind of license renewal with our customers will be totally different, much more kind of expedient, much less friction, as well as signing new customers will be much less friction, having much less friction, much more speedy. Good example of this kind of a model, kind of if I would pick a role model, what this could look like with all of our customers would be Sony, who has been our customer now 6 years. We are now, right now, having a second renewal with them. Very different discussion than your typical license renewal discussion. We are engaged with Sony on kind of jointly funded R&D. We have a joint licensing programs, and they are a licensee of our technology. And having this engagement and this depth of engagement, really, it's a totally different dynamic. If I look at the renewal discussions, it's kind of all these things come to bear, and it's really a collaborative effort. Now, if we look at the video, there actually is a yet another kind of a opportunity, yet another avenue for research engagement to our customers. Not only through the standard-based technologies and coding side, like 266 and MBEC Immersive, including the kind of new kinds of technologies like point cloud compression, omnidirectional media formats, but also things like light field and associated AR, VR, MR applications. Different capabilities in image processing to preserve or enhance in image quality. I talked about digital TV. This is becoming increasingly important in streaming, communications, new user experiences. High dynamic range is a very important technology. And all in all, really a state-of-the-art video platform development for ourselves and to be kind of then engaged with our customers. Now, question, of course, is that how does this turn into numbers? And Rich is the best person to talk about that. Rich.
Thanks, Kai. Well, I have only a few slides for you here today, but they cover 3 or 4 important topics. The first of those is, what is our opportunity for top-line growth? The second is an update on our cost discipline, particularly over the long term and with respect to the recent acquisition of the Technicolor licensing business. The third is the operating leverage that results from the first two, and then more importantly, what do we do with the cash that we generate as a result? So we start on the top line. We have a great base of revenue, as I think Bill or Kai mentioned, we're expecting over $300 million on a recurring basis this year. Top line from principally the top 3 vendors in the market, as well as others. We have Apple, Samsung, and Huawei all under license. Although that number does not include any revenue contribution on a post-606 basis from Huawei. That license does come up for renewal very soon at the end of the year, and we would hope to be able to renew that on terms under 606 that will give us recurring revenue, and that's generally our feeling about any new deal going forward. Overall, that revenue base comes from a little bit less than half the market under license, so that speaks to the opportunity being licensing the other half. When you go back and look at our market share or under license in both 3G and 4G, we're in the range of maybe 2/3 to 3/4 of the market under license. We certainly think that's a reasonable expectation here in 4G. We acknowledge that the bulk of the remaining market that we need to license is based on Chinese manufacturers, but we have shown that we can do that with the existing license with Huawei. Altogether, we have over $650 million of cash coming due to us under our existing contracts. So that's a great place to be. You know, an important point, I think years ago we got focused so much in investor communications around litigation and what's the status of litigation. Thankfully, our litigation cost has been well down from what it was, 4 or 5 years ago. And really, when you step back and look at it, over 90% of our agreements we've been able to achieve without litigation. So, we've been very successful in driving what we prefer to do, amicably negotiated agreements, particularly along the lines of the kinds that Kai just described with Sony. This is a slightly different version of the slide that Bill showed you. So again, as he mentioned, almost all of our revenue, the vast majority of the revenue in 2018 is based on that top line. So just over $300 million expected. And again, the goal there is to drive that up and above $500 million. We next have the consumer electronics market. And I'll remind you that the Technicolor acquisition does 2 things for us. The video patents are so important, the video technology is so important to our core handset market. It can help us achieve and even exceed the first goal, but it also opens up the consumer electronics market, as Bill talked about earlier today. So we haven't sized that up at this point. It's only been 2 months or 3 months since we closed the acquisition. So we're definitely working on that opportunity. But as you saw from the numbers Bill showed, it's a tremendous market, and we're really excited about it. Moving over to IoT, as Bill said, a little bit slower to develop than maybe we would have liked. We did set a goal 2 years ago at our Investor Day of achieving $75 to $100 million by 2021. What I can tell you is sitting here today, based on what's contracted going into 2019, we expect roughly $5 million from those contracts. We'd certainly like to see new business, maybe double or better that in 2019. But certainly the overall view, while the timing may be a little bit slower, as Bill indicated, the overall view to the opportunity is that's still very, very significant. And then, 5G, as has been discussed, it really relates to all of these opportunities. It's the next phase. So moving on to cost discipline. When we first announced the Technicolor acquisition, we put together a metric to try to give the investment community an understanding of what our perspective was. We acknowledged right off the bat that these were very important assets that we thought would be very valuable to the company and to our shareholders. But initially, they wouldn't provide very much revenue, and there would be a little bit of cost that we would have to digest. But long term, we felt that we could do that because we basically have 2 very large portfolios, and I'll speak to it in a moment. There's an opportunity to kind of prune the costs and still maintain the best parts of both portfolios. So the other thing to be mindful of is Technicolor had largely an internal prosecution team. And when I say prosecution, I mean the act of filing the patents and maintaining the patents. So their team had a lot of internal resources. Our team historically has been more external use of law firms with only a little bit of internal. Under our accounting policies, we actually capitalize the external, but expense the internal. So there's a little bit of a shift of a mix here between the internal and the external, and we want to make sure that people understand that. In this metric, what we've done is backed out depreciation and amortization, but then added back capitalized prosecution costs so that for purposes of this metric, they're treated the same, whether it's internal or external. And what we've said is that we think long-term, we can get our cost levels back roughly in line to where they were in 2017. And in fact, we said at the time, back in February or March, that we had already taken steps in anticipation of M&A to begin doing what we could on our side. And you see the results of that here, because if you look at our Q3 results, which included 2, not 3 months of Technicolor since the acquisition closed at the end of July, we actually were less than $1 million above the 2017 run rate as regards this metric. Having said that, we do expect a little bit of increase in cost over the next 2 quarters before they start to come back down again and get back in line with those 2017 levels. So right now, we anticipate another $5 to $10 million each of the next 2 quarters. And then we look for Q2 2019 to see some of the more recent initiatives that we've taken to get a little more traction and see those cost levels come down. And we currently expect to hit our original goal of getting back to 2017 levels or roughly in that range within 18 months post-close. So that kind of translates to full year 2020 being in line with that goal. Now, having said that, the most important thing for me is that we achieve that, and we achieve it without doing anything that would be that would negatively impact our top line growth. So if it takes a little bit longer, I think that's probably fine, just so long as we're making all the right decisions and eventually get there. So how do we get there? So I already mentioned we have these 2 very large portfolios. I think the number that you saw up on the slide earlier was about 36,000 assets, or more than 36,000 assets, which already reflects some of the pruning that we've done. If you go back a couple years, each portfolio, I think, had in excess of 20,000 assets. And I think there's an opportunity to do a little more there. It does take a little bit of time before when you actually prune an asset to achieve the full cost savings, and that's why some of the timing is a little bit uncertain, that is. But again, we're very confident that we can get there. The other thing that we've done is we've looked at our R&D spend. For a number of years, we've been talking about the handsets being so much more than they were in the early 2000s when you're basically just doing voice communication. There's so much more technology resident on a device that we decided several years ago that we needed to start to invest in areas other than just the cellular communication. That investment, in part, included video, and it really helped us identify video as an area that we really wanted to focus on. So, another opportunity here is refocusing some of the investment dollars that are not in wireless and not in video into the video space now. In addition, there was some redundancy in G&A from the team that came over, so some of those individuals didn't join or had left the company. And then finally, we have a number of partners under our relationships going forward, and those partners will also help share responsibility for our cost. So that drives a lot of operating leverage. When we have a history of growing the top line with relatively little growth in OpEx. Long term, that's what we'd like to see continue, and that will continue to generate sizable cash flows. With every investment decision and with capital allocation decisions, we always think of the shareholder in mind, and I think we have an excellent track record of returning capital to shareholders. So about a year ago, it was September 2017, we had our most recent increase to our authorization to take the buyback from $400 million up to $500 million. I think at the time there was something like 87 million left, and that increased it to 187. We actually find ourselves in a similar position today, and just announced this morning that our board has authorized another $100 million increase to the authorization. It just works out that over the intervening time period, we've bought back roughly $100 million worth of stock. So with that, I'll turn it back to Patrick. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill, Kai, Rich. We'll turn to a Q&A portion now. I just want to highlight the presence of some folks who've joined us today, and I appreciate their presence, and also some folks online. So joining us from the sell side community, we've got Charlie Anderson from Doherty & Company, Matt Galinko from National Securities, we've got Scott Searle from Roth. They all three cover us, and we've also got Eric Wold, who's joining us online from San Francisco at B. Riley. Thank you very much for the four of you. We've also got a guest here today, Anya Soderstrom from Sidoti Capital. Thanks for coming. I'll turn to Q&A. For folks who are joining us online, feel free to send me an email with your questions. If you go to www.interdigital.com and click on Contact, you'll see that my name and my email are at the top of the contact list. Feel free to click on it and send your question in. I'll be monitoring. Meanwhile, in the room, question from Spencer Waxman.
Thanks. Just to try and understand the financial sides regarding cash. We have the 660 of cash revenue under contract, and we're going towards 200 million a year of expense run rate. So can you kind of help us piece that together with the potential cash flow during that period, since we have looking at 800 million of cash expenses, 600 million, 660 of cash revs? What's renewing that could bridge that, or what's unit sensitivity that could impact that one way or the other, and sort of pipeline, so how we could kind of start getting towards understanding potential cash flow during the period you.
Sure. So thank you for the opportunity to clarify that, Spence. That is contracted cash based on largely on fixed price agreements or based on reports that we've received. So there's an additional element of cash from existing licensees that are on a variable basis that would be additive to that, albeit the vast majority of our revenue now is on fixed. And then, of course, that's only based on our existing licensees. So we certainly expect to and are working towards driving that growth that I spoke about, right. and therefore driving additional cash flow.
And then just without growth, but if we took what's expiring, I assume if a contract is up for renewal during that period, you're zeroing it out for till 2022, or you're assuming a renewal?
Yeah, no. So that is based on what's contracted today.
Okay, so
if a renewal is not contract, the renewal would not be, so.
Okay, so could you just help us, like, if those renewed, what that would look like, and just give us a sense of what the renewal risk is between the run rate now and that, how we kind of move toward the trailer of that?
I'm trying to think let me maybe get back to you, Spence, rather than try to give you mental math right off the fly here.
Question from Charlie Anderson.
Yeah, I had one on IoT and then one on consumer electronics. So just starting off with IoT, you mentioned you're still sticking to the $75 million to $100 million goal versus the $5 million contracted next year. Can you help us just bridge that gap? How much of it is reliant on Avanci and what they're doing with autos, with smart meters? How much of it is InterDigital that has to fill that gap directly? And then I've got a follow-up on consumer electronics.
Sure, Bill.
So I'd say a good, there's a number of different scenarios you could look at, and that's how we get to this range of 75 to 100 million bucks, right? So Avanci makes up a portion of that, and if you look at where we are today on revenue, that they're actually a good contributor into the number we have today, and they only have one automobile manufacturer under license. So if they can continue to be successful with 3 other manufacturers, that's going to help us well towards that goal. There's a component of IoT licensing outside of automobiles that right now they're not pursuing, that we would pursue. Now, the question of whether Avanci ultimately expands its opportunity, and we'll figure out the most efficient way to go to market. So that would be the next piece. I think the connection revenue overall is probably the bigger contributor to that number overall, because the software piece we're being more conservative on because it really is the one where, unlike cellular IoT, I'd say that's established. It just has to grow. One M2M is not yet firmly established, and so we're being more conservative around that. That is a two-part effort. It's an effort around the cordant business we have today to basically get the technology into the operators' hands and get them excited about it, and we're working that very well, I think. And then ultimately, it's licensing the two portfolios we have. One is the Convita portfolio with Sony, where a lot of our IoT software patents sit. There's a separate portfolio we have. I would ultimately think we're going to run one licensing program and probably would run it through Convita along with Sony, and that will come a little bit later. So I'd say it's the bulk of the opportunity is on the connection side, at least today, how we're measuring it. And then the other part is the software side, the connection side, mostly driven through Avanci, the software side mostly driven through us.
Right, and then on consumer electronics, you guys did not give a specific revenue goal there. You mentioned it's $400 billion of total product. I wonder if you could maybe just help us understand, is there some framework to sort of how to think about the size of your opportunity in consumer electronics relative to handsets, relative to IoT? And then also, you're sort of reiterating the 500 to 600 million handsets, but with Technicolor, are you not getting a bump in your royalty rate? And shouldn't that number go higher, or are you backing off on the number of units underlying that number? Thanks.
So answering the second question, we've always had this range, so I think it pushes you higher in the range and maybe above that, but it's, we're not that smart yet to figure out exactly where we're going to land, so I think putting out the same range makes the most sense. Consumer electronics, I'd break it down into a couple different pieces. And, as we've always done, once we get comfortable with numbers, then we typically give people the milestones and the goals where we're heading. So there's the TV piece. I think that's the more mature of those opportunities in terms of a licensing market that exists. And there's known volumes. It's 300 million units a year. There's only a few customers that make up most of that market. And so, and both Sony and Technicolor individually licensed in that space. So I feel like that one we probably have a much better handle on, and so we'll be able to give some granularity. I think once we get through a couple customers and understand better how the market is reacting and also how it's coming together with our own licensing activities, right? The next set of devices are set-top box market. Well, so that's another opportunity for us to leverage the assets. It's a well-established market. It's a tough market because of the way that whole supply chain is managed. But I think that's another one where we could probably get our arms around the number sooner. Then there's the range of other devices in the house, and I think this is where it gets the opportunity is exciting, but putting a number to it is more difficult. All the different streaming devices, the smart home, all these things. How 5G is going to penetrate that? So. We will give the granularity. We're going to give it when we feel like we're going to be able to lock in on a number that makes a lot of sense and people can feel confident about. So when that happens, but probably sometime next year we would give a little bit more specificity around these things.
Any other questions? Just while the microphone makes its way over. It's interesting that we're doing Investor Day during the holiday season, because I think if you just look at your TV and look at the assault of ads for various devices that we're all seeing at Christmas, I think we're starting to see that opening salvo of the world being a lot more than just handsets and TVs. Go ahead, please.
I guess probably Bill is the best person, but whoever wants to, you guys want to answer this. There's a different headline out of China every day or out of the U.S. regarding China. I was just wondering if you guys could level set your perspective on where we are and how you think this may or may not be resolved over what timeline and where you may fit into the picture. Thank you. So
you're right. We kind of all get up in the morning and kind of look at our phone and maybe wince a little bit as we see what's happening with regards to a variety of things in terms of trade war and other things. So, one I'd start with, look, obviously we play a long game at InterDigital, and so we're not going to get buffeted around too much by something that happened today or tomorrow or the next day. We understand the need to be present in front of those customers. We understand that that's a long-term commitment, and that, you know, ultimately, you know, these issues, which seem to be very dramatic today, we'll find there will be a resolution, and we want to obviously be positioned there. Now, that doesn't mean we as a company need to wait for a resolution. If you look at the various things going on with China, you know, we're not in the midst of the trade war. We're not selling products that are affected by the trade war. The respect for intellectual property is something that is paramount in this whole dispute, and so you would think that both sides would be behaving in a way that demonstrated that, so that's actually a positive thing for us. And if you think about generally the importance of patents in 5G and other things in China, you know, one of the things you could think about is, while they may get challenged at some point in terms of equipment sales for a variety of reasons, the one thing that they will always have to rely upon is their patents. And so one of the things that we're well positioned and have a common interest with them in making sure that intellectual property is protected. So, you know, we're going to maintain our effort in China. It's been very successful so far in terms of the higher level of engagement. You know, Jeff is over there on a regular basis, and other members of the team are over there on a regular basis. Yeah, you can get knocked around in a week or something like that and by different news reports, but we find it's like a weevil, you know, we kind of pop right back up and we just keep going. So in terms of predicting timing, you know, I can't predict the timing of anything with regard to our business. The deals happen when they happen, and, but we continue to feel good about the pace of the discussion, the nature of the discussion. Technicolor has been very helpful in that, not only in terms of the assets that we bring to the table, but also, as Kai talked about, the partnering capability. So. So, you know, we're going to keep doing our work over there.
Thanks. And just before we get to the next question, Rich, I'm going to ask you to follow up on Spence's question from earlier.
Yeah, so for everybody's benefit, again, the question was, what if, I think it was posited as if you had renewals over that time period, and I'll say based on existing terms, you know, how would that change things? And basically you'd be looking at adding another couple $100 million of cash flow, so you'd probably be in the $900 to $1 billion range. I may be, as I'm thinking through, I may be missing one or two, so maybe it's even a little bit above that. But that's, you know, certainly a material component. Notably, as we said, Huawei is expiring at the end of this year.
And any other big ones besides Huawei?
We had the, as Kai referenced, Sony, which is expiring in December as well. They're the main ones that I'm thinking of. There may be others.
And I'd refer folks to our 10K, where every year we list which important licensees term out before the end of the year. So that's listed on our 10K as well. Any other questions?
Hey, maybe just to follow up on the financial front for Rich. The increased $5 to $10 million in operating costs and capitalized costs in the next couple of quarters, are those more one-time in nature? You say they start to come down, and just kind of want to understand a little bit of the trajectory of how that'll come down starting in the second quarter next year? Yeah, so it's there is a one-time element. Another element is just because you have a full quarter. So if you compare to third quarter, you only had, you know, two months. One of those 2 months notably was August, where you had a lot of people, particularly on the acquired team in Europe, that would have been on holiday, and that brings down, you know, it doesn't maybe impact the comp, but it brings down overall activity levels. So you have those two things, as well as additional one-time integration costs. And then the trajectory of how it comes down, I think our best view is that it starts coming down in the second quarter. I can be a little bit less precise on exactly what that trajectory is, or I have to be a little bit less precise because, as I said, some of these actions, they take time. If you decide not to maintain a patent, you're only going to get the savings if and when that next maintenance payment comes due to whatever patent office or jurisdiction the payment relates to. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there. Okay. And maybe to follow up on the IoT front as well, it sounds like the timeline is slipped a little bit in terms of that 75 to 100 million, but the goal hasn't. So is that a 2-year timeframe slip? And then as part of that, the one M2M platform, Do you expect any revenue contribution from that, or are we still in pilot phase in 2019 for the most part? Because I know there's been a lot of activity. It's very promising, enabling the carriers who in many cases don't have those types of platform capabilities. Yep. So wondering if there's anything that we see from that contribution standpoint.
Yeah, so there is a little bit, even in the $5 million that I mentioned to start with the second part of your question on 1M to M, albeit it's very low margin revenue because it's kind of the initial tests and NRE and so forth that goes along with it. But it's also an important precursor to what hopefully is additional revenue down the road. So it does include an element of that. As far as the overall goal and an update on the timeline, I think just given the way that we're seeing the market unravel, I'm sorry, not unravel, develop is the better word. I'm hesitant to put a different date or timeline on it at this point, but rather tell you where we're at and emphasize that we still see a very big opportunity there.
Okay. And just lastly, if I could, just from a reporting standpoint now, you've given some granularity in terms of IoT, you've got Technicolor. How are you thinking about reporting going forward 2019 and beyond? You're looking more at thinking about it from a segment standpoint, giving us a little more granularity, maybe a little bit early. And then also on the M&A front, you know, Hillcrest, Technicolor now, certainly a lot of cash flow, a lot of flexibility to do some things. The current thought process and what that pipeline looks like, or timeline, or a moratorium on that timeline until you digest Technicolor. Thanks.
Yeah, so the decision on segment reporting really is driven off of the internal reports that we look at, you know, for the accountants in the room. What I'll tell you there is it's something that we're always looking at in terms of, you know, do we have an internal reporting structure that then drives us towards segment reporting. At this time, we're not anticipating any near-term change.
And there was a second part to your question. M&A.
The latest thoughts, pipeline,
should we take the increased buyback this morning as a sign that we shouldn't expect anything material?
If you could just reiterate the questions
in the
right.
foreseeable future.
Right. So the question is around M&A. I'd say, you know, what's the continuing interest of the company, and how are we thinking about that in relation to Technical, and also how are we thinking about it in relation to the buyback we just authorized today. So. So a couple of things. One, as a priority for the company, is certainly getting Technicolor integrated well and driving value with Technicolor. So that is our first priority. So, and I think it really relates to the buyback question. We are really bullish about the Technicolor acquisition, which is why we've authorized an additional repurchase of stock, because we believe that we can drive significant value with the combination of InterDigital's assets and the Technicolor assets. In terms of other M&A, you know, to the extent that I think there's still opportunity in the market to acquire assets that would either further strengthen the mobile program, but may also strengthen the consumer electronics program that we have. You know, my preference would be, unless something has a date stamp on it, that I would want to focus on the Technicolor acquisition first, and then we'll come back to other things later. Most times things don't have stamps on them, because especially I'm finding in things that are of interest to us, you know, we're kind of unique, and therefore those assets tend to sit around for a while, and you can always go back at a convenient time. You know, that said, if there was something that truly did have a timestamp on it, we needed to move, we would balance that need to move against the very important need to integrate Technicolor. So, you know, one thing I've told the board, I really like the assets that we have today. I think we've got a very, very strong hand to play, and we should play it well.
Any other questions? Okay, well, if there's no additional questions, I've looked online, and there are no additional questions online either. Once again, I'll thank everybody for coming out to Brooklyn for our Investor Day. It was great to have you all. There are pens and notebooks, don't forget. A couple of notes. Again, I would remind you to come up to the desk and take a look at our two technology demos. The engineers are here all the way from Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, and Melville, New York, and they'd love to show you what they do. And I know that when we talk to investors about our technology development, sometimes it's a little conceptual, so it's nice to have something to show you here. And again, the folks at NYU would be thrilled to take you on a tour of the school and the lab. So if you'd like to gather at the front for that, if you're interested, that'd be great. Thanks very much, everybody.